Joining me in the inaugural edition of Decent Cities is the co-founder and CEO of POKT Network, Michael O'Rourke. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe.
So I recently met you for the first time at a local meetup, and I'm one of the throngs of people that have taken an interest in blockchain, something you've been into for many, many years. Let's talk a little bit about your history with blockchain and interacting with it. And you had an original company around phone tokens, and then we'll move into what POKT is after that. So what's the brief history?
Yeah, so my background, it's interesting. It's important to know that I was born in the Dominican Republic, but raised in Tampa, Florida since I was about 2 years old. And having with my family there, most of my family have definitely used Western Union and felt that pain several times. In 2007, 2008, paid attention a lot to the crash that happened. Paid attention to Occupy Wall Street and learned a lot about the financial system during that time. About 2010, 2011, I worked at a credit union selling loans. So I saw thousands of credit reports and kind of saw another kind of perspective of the financial system. All that to say, it kind of warmed me up for discovering Bitcoin in 2013 when I read a Wired article about the Silk Road, about this cryptocurrency that's being used to pay for these things, and kind of led me down the rabbit hole of the subreddit, read the Bitcoin white paper, and really kind of drank the Kool-Aid in terms of the technology and the power of it, and really started to believe that a separate financial system was being born, and just the power of having something native to the internet that's programmable, without having to know, to be able to send money without having to know who you are, where you are, where you're from, anything like that, is pretty world changing. And began to believe that, Bitcoin and the broader blockchain and cryptocurrency industry will affect our lives just as much as the internet has over the last 30 years.
That's great. And as you went down that journey, do you remember how it sort of expanded beyond just the financial aspects and the currency and financial aspects of it into other applications?
Yeah. So when I got into it in 2013, it was just Bitcoin, not blockchain. And it wasn't really until Ethereum was launched in about 2015, 2016 timeframe. And I remember watching Vitalik announce Ethereum at Bitcoin Miami in January 2014. I remember thinking, this is vaporware. This thing isn't going to work. And it wasn't until I actually got to write the smart contracts myself, because my background is in iOS development, where I deployed a smart contract to Ethereum and was able to interact with it. And anyone could do, what I allowed that program to do, that smart contract. And that was just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, deploying this application that once it's deployed, it's out of my hands, right? And anyone can use it permissionlessly, is a pretty world-changing thing. There's definitely downsides. It's slower. These sorts of things, in some cases it can be more expensive. In other cases, it can be cheaper, depending on the type of application. But from there, we really saw an explosion of people building applications, myself included, with my co-founders for POKT. And, 2017, we saw all these ICOs and all these kind of, in most cases, wishful thinking, interesting ideas that people were really kind of just coming up with. And, that definitely inspired me and my co-founders in building POKT, because this idea of decentralization, this idea of kind of leveling the playing field is really important for us. It's really, fundamentally, it's very much a cultural and political statement, for lack of a better way to put it, in participating in this.
Yeah. And there's some interesting nuances as the stacks develop around the applications, where you have sometimes some either natural or unnatural counter to centralized things that seem to always come where to get the whole process completely decentralized sometimes either doesn't make sense or is a bigger challenge in and of itself, even though sort of pieces of it will. But one of the big steps that you've taken with POKT is to make to decentralize some of the interaction originally with Ethereum, but now into other chains. So, what's sort of the vision behind how you're making all these different chains accessible to developers?
Yeah, you make a really good point there. So we have these truly decentralized networks in, say, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that are truly censorship resistant, difficult to capture, these sorts of things. The challenge is, and we've seen this in kind of the traditional Web 2 world, while the bottom layer is difficult to capture, it gets easier each layer you go up. So as an example, we go from the hardware from the computer to the browser, with Google, to now phone applications with Apple. And now we see kind of things like with WeChat and these other messaging applications, kind of where the value is being captured in different parts of the stack. And the same thing is happening in crypto, except instead of value, this is becoming centralized or is still centralized. And for us to really kind of realize this vision, POKT sits on top of kind of the base layer of these blockchains, particularly as a middleware. So if you use an application, let's say Uber, as an example, you order a car, there's some servers that Uber owns that says, hey, I need a car here in St. Pete, Florida. And it's going to connect the cars themselves to allow me to grab a grab a car. And, basically they just use some middleware to make that connection happen. POKT does the same thing. We sit in between, let's say, a wallet and the Ethereum blockchain that it's trying to connect to, and we help route requests for balances, information, smart contract data to the end user in a really efficient and cost-effective way. You can actually kind of think of us like an Uber for servers, where you actually don't know what server you're going to connect to when you query them, and that's all done via a blockchain that we built called POKT Network.
And that's sort of two kind of main functions. One is just portability and affordability, so that you can use your SDK to make life easier for the developer. But you actually built this in response to one similar provider who it was doing 70 to 80% of the transactions for Ethereum, thus centralizing a lot of the action on Ethereum. So, how much of that observation was an impetus for this?
No. So we were using, when I was first deploying smart contracts, we were using a provider called Infura, and at the time they were doing the bulk of the requests in the network, and we saw this as a concerning thing, and we also saw an opportunity to be able to do it better as a decentralized network, right? It's interesting in the infrastructure space. There's a group of people who really care about the decentralization or the privacy, and there's another group of people who really just want stable infrastructure. And we've managed to build something that's cheaper and more stable than kind of the traditional kind of business, right? So back in 2016, 2017 is when we really started thinking about it. Spent about 3 years designing and iterating what this thing would be like. We really did everything to not build our own blockchain, from a set of smart contracts in Ethereum to layer 2s and these sorts of things. But to really build it the right way and in the most efficient way, we opted to end up building our own blockchain, which has been an interesting journey, to say the least.
Well, no one can ever take away from you the fact that you did it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then, as we move into the philosophy of decentralization, so you've actually made it as you've developed it so that there are a lot of the profit and a lot of the pieces of it that which would be considered traditional corporate aren't coming to you. You're actually existing as just another node on the network. Yeah,
it's funny, when we were first starting to raise money, investors would ask us, so how are you going to make revenue? Be like, we're not. Everyone else will, and it'll drive value to the network. It's kind of counterintuitive, but as an open source project, the more open you make it, the more people who come in, the more value it drives to the actual ecosystem itself, right? And that's really how we build a successful network, is by having it as accessible, as open, for anyone to come in and actually participate. We're finding that our community was probably just 10, 15 people when we first launched it about 10 months ago, and today we're looking at probably pushing 100 people in our active people in our community. That's because people have had the opportunity to participate, whether on the application side or the node side, and earn some pocket and provide infrastructure for people, and they really kind of see the long-term vision of what we're building, and it's been really exciting to see.
And are there mechanisms in place to, obviously, I believe you have a randomization element so that when people make their calls into the nodes, that they don't know which node they're going to get. now, as far as preventing an Infura type of scenario, have you built in protections against that so no individual groups or ownerships or whatever can command a large portion of the nodes?
Yeah, so that also, it's interesting. There's a couple points there on the randomization. So traditionally, if I'm using Uber, I'm always going to hit the same server every single time, without fail for the many years that Uber has been up. In Pocket, every hour I hit a set of 5 different servers that's coordinated by this amorphous protocol. So in fact, you might be hitting a server that's in Australia, one that's in Europe, a couple that are in the US at any one point in time, which is super interesting. And in terms of kind of avoiding a scenario where any one person owns too much of the infrastructure, that's been kind of nipped at the bud from the beginning. For example, we limited the amount of nodes that people could run at the beginning who are part of what we call the genesis, which is when the blockchain was born. As a result, it's given many other people opportunity to come in and participate and earn Pocket and so on and so forth. And the way that the protocol is designed is similar to Bitcoin. Bitcoin used to be pretty concentrated. And over time, as people need to sell Bitcoin to cover their server costs and this sort of thing, we've seen a broader distribution of Bitcoin over time as opposed to a more concentrated distribution. And Pocket is economically very similar in that respect. So as Pocket grows, as more Pocket gets minted, people need to sell their Pocket to cover their server costs, for example. And that results in a distributive effect in these kinds of chains. So we feel pretty good about that.
That's great. So let's walk through the mechanics of that a little bit then, as far as the incentive structure. So if you're the developer, you're essentially you're buying or staking some Pocket, and does that then provide liquidity into to the reserve then? And then I know there's an element as people are performing tasks and running their nodes, they're able to earn minted Pocket, and then what's the mechanism for translating that into some other kind of value, and where does burning play a role?
Yeah, so starting with the application side, there's 2 types of stakes, which basically is just putting your cryptocurrency, your Pocket, in escrow. You're saying, hey, I'm going to relinquish control for this time that I'm using it into the protocol, but I can then grab it out if I'm not using it or whatever it might be. So the difference is on the developer side is instead of paying a monthly fee to a SaaS business, like let's say I'm paying $50 a month for infrastructure service, which is the standard today. In Pocket, I might stake or put in escrow $500 once for the same access. So what that means is, as a developer, after using Pocket for a couple months, I'm already in the black. And even after 6 months, I'm actually getting closer to free infrastructure for as long as I use it during that time. So when I say Pocket is significantly cheaper than kind of our centralized counterparts, it's because of that. We don't have a centralized company that needs to charge to earn a margin that's also running on the cloud, that also needs to upcharge to earn a margin, and all these sorts of things. And Pocket just completely removes all of that out and makes it significantly cheaper to run for developers. So it's on the developer side. They just stake or just put Pocket in escrow, and that basically pays for their service. There's an important point there because economically as a system, this also pulls Pocket out of circulation, which is an important point there. On the node side, there's a node stake. So we have the app stake, we have the node stake. Well, the apps stake to have the right to send requests to the network. Nodes stake to have the right to do work in the network. That's really important because Pocket is a trustless system. And by putting my money in escrow, my Pocket in escrow, that subjects me as at risk of the node of potentially getting my own stake slashed. That only happens if you're dishonest or lie or cheat within the system. The definition of a protocol is just a set of rules. So as long as the nodes in the network follow the rules, they then earn a certain amount of Pocket for each request that they serve from the application side. So we have this nice kind of economic system where both sides are taking Pocket out of circulation. While there is being Pocket minted, today it is cheaper, or it is less than what is being taken out of circulation. So you have this nice positive value capture effect, which is what has allowed us to bootstrap the network from the ground up. Over the long run, we have various burning mechanisms to help keep it sustainable. This comes from fees. Maybe eventually developers might get burned, so even Pocket could become a traditional SaaS business in the future. But where developers might be paying $50 a month today, in Pocket it'll be $5 a month, for example, based on the middlemen that are taken out of the equation in this case. So yeah, we've created this kind of economic system where we have staking, minting, and burning, and we've also got a governance apparatus that really makes the decisions on the economics of the network as well.
And so in understanding the staking piece of it, you had mentioned that if the developer decides to abandon the app, are they able to get back?
Yep. Okay. They are, yeah. So they can, if they don't want to build anymore on blockchain, or for whatever reason don't like Pocket, they can unstake their Pocket and then stake it and get all their money back. Well, that depends. There's a market and stuff like that. It could be less, it could be more. Who knows? But nonetheless, that developer can recover some or all of their funds.
And given that the trend for appreciation in currency values for good coins, potentially they could make money returning back the money that they staked initially.
And what's interesting is that that same developer, the amount of requests that they get is actually reflected by the price of Pocket, not how much Pocket they've staked. So if, let's say, the price were to double, well, they could also get double the requests for the same amount of Pocket, which is a really powerful mechanism as well.
That's great. So it inspires getting in early and riding it up.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. One question, this is more of a general question about proof of stake, is, the idea is that the potential loss in the staked, coin is the incentive not to be a bad actor. But as smart contracts evolve, there may be contents of those contracts that are more valuable than the stake lost. So say real estate transactions, for example, become parts of smart contracts, and it may be $1 million property that, if there's a way to manipulate the chain in a way and sacrifice the stake, that the incentives may be there to do so. Is that something is that a fair concern?
Yeah. So the simplest equation for that is, if I'm staking $10,000 worth of something, but the asset or the work that I'm doing is worth $20,000, well, I can lie and cheat, get my $20,000, get my $10,000 burned, and then come out in the clear with $10,000, right? So that's a really important part of many of these systems. For example, today, Solana, there's a DEX called Serum on Solana, and that's actually worth more than what Solana is worth today, which is interesting.
Right.
That said, there are some protections, but it is a concern generally from people when something like that happens.
Got it. So can we talk a little bit about what you see as the biggest opportunities for, investors, business folks, people that want to exist with blockchain at the, not just throwing money at it and hoping it'll appreciate, but actually create things that can utilize blockchain. Certainly there's an element where this is such a radical and major change in the internet or the digital world as we know it, that it makes you feel like there are some of those early days opportunities out there, right? I was talking earlier today. It's almost like the Wild West, where you rolled out and you could just pick a beautiful plot of land because nobody had it yet. So where do you think some of those opportunities are most readily available?
Yeah, in terms of participation, I would recommend everyone to look at decentralized finance. There's a Chrome extension called MetaMask. I recommend installing it, taking $100, expect to lose it, but play around with some of these decentralized finance applications. You can get yourself loans. You can work on derivatives. It's a separate, completely separate financial system that's being built right now. And it's just incredibly fascinating. And what's really different about this is the pace of experimentation is just exponential. So people are coming out with different flavors, completely new innovations, and basically all of these experiments are kind of just melding together and building up each other as one. A really powerful property of these things is this idea of composability and how these different decentralized finance applications can literally build on each other and lend from each other. So you've got, an exchange with a lending protocol and an under-collateralized lending protocol and a perp protocol and a derivatives protocol, and all of them are kind of building on each other. And you kind of just have this incredible ecosystem of things that are being built that are creating really strong opportunities that are kind of unheard of in the world today when it comes to like the interest that people are earning and this sort of thing. Now, like I said, there's, none of this stuff doesn't come without risk, right? Sometimes these things get hacked. Sometimes you lose your private keys. So you kind of have to really feel comfortable to really dive deep. But in terms of learning how these things work, I definitely recommend looking into DeFi or decentralized finance. I think NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are incredibly powerful. We're seeing, I myself bought a couple NFTs from one of my favorite artists a couple months ago with the hope that, maybe I'll get some special access to something later down the road. But these things are so powerful that we'll start to see fractionalization of art, which we're already seeing. I think you mentioned real estate. I think seeing fractionalization of real estate and these sorts of things are increasingly more likely to happen. People have tried this before, especially in 2017, 2018. But the industry has learned so much and the infrastructure has improved enough to the point to where I think it's possible to execute on these sorts of things. And that's what exists today. Moving forward, I might be biased here, but I think there's lots of different middleware protocols that are coming out that are showing new, different ways of solving things, like a mesh network for the internet or a decentralized Tor, Pocket, decentralized infrastructure, a decentralized Google. All these things exist today, which is really, really interesting in terms of what I think is being built. Another one, gaming. Just a game I was playing called Dark Forest. That's super interesting. This idea of blockchain gaming, which also coincides with NFTs and how these games can build on each other and this sort of thing. So, off the top of my head, these sorts of things. There's a lot of work being done in VR and this sort of thing as well. That's really quite exciting. That's happening today as well.
And have you had concerns previously with regard? You said decentralization has some pluses and some minuses. Sometimes I equate. It's probably not the best example, but we work with boards and nonprofit boards, company boards, just as part of some of our work that we do. And I always find that consensus in those environments often reduces to the mean, right? Where it's because there's the element of acceptance, because there's the element of having to work with others in a way that's a little bit thinner, right? By definition, with the board, people just kind of show up, and whatever that comes out of their brain in those couple of hours. Now, when you have people that are working on apps, they have the potential to connect at a deeper level, but a lot of times, a lot of these things are being done separately, and so I see some parallels there, right? To some of the again, mostly the reduction to the mean, with limited information in open source, having to being able to be bold and make some of the choices that, or pursue some of the visions that more traditional private endeavors have had. Do you think that's something that's a non-issue, or do you see it as an issue?
Yeah, this kind of goes to the core of what is special about blockchains, and fundamentally, what they really are is a coordination mechanism. So. Religion is the first coordination mechanism. The invention of a corporation is a coordination mechanism. Governments are also coordination mechanisms, and I believe blockchains are also a form of socially scalable coordination to the level that we've never seen before. So part of the challenges today is how do we come up with the processes to coordinate and make decisions? One thing we're finding is that the bigger these things get, the harder and slower it is to change them. Rightfully so, because they capture more value and rightfully become more conservative with the decision making that you're making, or that are the decisions that get made. But what's interesting is that if there is a disagreement, whereas I was born in the Dominican Republic, I didn't have a choice with my parents to decide to move me to the U.S., although I'm glad they did. In crypto and in blockchain, you always have the right to exit, which is really fascinating. I can always fork your code and say, hey, I don't agree with you. I want to go this way. Whoever's with me, come with me. And as a result, that's part of the acceleration and experimentation that we're seeing. But we're also learning how to make decisions in this kind of digital jurisdiction / metaverse world that we're building. And frankly, we're kind of treading new ground here in terms of how best to do that. What are the kind of frameworks? What are the tools that we can use to quickly and efficiently make decisions? Because in the end, these are human problems.
Right.
We can have all the computers in the world, but
sure,
it's humans that are making the decisions in the end. In the grand scheme of things. So,
it's in it. The examples you gave of religion, government, and corporations all had a leader, right? They had a rule book that was disseminated down, and it seems that blockchain, other than sort of, it probably has first mover leaders or thought leaders. Obviously, now you already start to see Church of Satoshi stuff floating around, right? So that those processes seem to be repeating themselves. And you wonder if even biologically humans are just hardwired to roll into those hierarchies coming from the days of living in tribes, right? So that will make this an interesting experiment. And I think the other interesting piece is that, and there's always resistance. I mean, the church resisted the printing press, right? But it'll be interesting. I think that I don't know that as many people saw the internet or social media or smartphones as existential threats in the way the banking may see DeFi. So do you feel like there's more of a resistance to this revolution or evolution than before?
Resistance, a little bit. I think up to this point, it's been more indifference. Very much how the internet. It wasn't until Netscape and these sorts of things where it started making real impact on the order of tens of millions of people. I like to think that we can there's many different paths that the space can go, right? And the question is how collaborative or how difficult can some kind of a integration be made, right? There was a pivotal bill in the early 90s that was made that really helped the internet. Right. I think if, we show, these governments and so on and so forth, of the value that crypto can bring and the benefit, I had a thought this morning about, we're kind of moving, where we've been a very globalized world. We're kind of moving towards things being a little bit more siloed, focusing on resiliency and these sorts of things, which has a really interesting parallel to blockchains, which are the definition of resiliency and focusing more on inefficiency than but resiliency, but maybe not having just-in-time transactions or something like that, right? So I wonder just generally where can we implement crypto and blockchains where the government really sees the benefit. I've generally seen the government pretty positive. I mean, they always want to take their taxes, but for the most part, they've more or less left it alone, really because it hasn't been big enough for them to care about. That might change in the future. I think there's a lot that can be done, locally, at the state level, at the federal level, that can really help, soften any conflict that might happen in the future.
And do you feel is it incumbent upon people who care about blockchain to be active now? There's a track going at the Blockchain Summit that's all about the policy and blockchain to be active.
100%. There's so much education that needs to be done. There's a lot more money in the space in terms of investment and businesses, especially in the U.S., where it's genuinely a little bit harder because of the gray areas in terms of lack of clarity of what we can do and what we can't. So people are having to run around in circles, figuring out the right way to do something without any real clarity sometimes. So yes, there's definitely things that can be done and are being done at the local and state and federal level, and should continue to be.
That's great. All right, I want to hit you with one final question. You're so good at distilling things, and this is a common question. When we talk about Pocket as a coin or as a token, when people ask you, where does the value come from? What is the value of a cryptocurrency? What's the answer you give them?
Well, it depends on the crypto, but in Pocket's case, the more developers who use it, the more value that drives the network. Very simply, I mean, we're like a traditional business. We have one KPI, and that's requests going through the network.
And it's a representation of work, essentially,
yes,
right? So the value comes in the work that goes into it. That's what gives it the value.
Yeah, because the more requests that get made, the more money nodes make, which increases the incentives to want to run more nodes, and you have this nice kind of virtuous cycle that happens.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, and I guess I was leaning more towards philosophically, it's just values what people agree as value, right?
Well, I thought about, I thought about like Dogecoin, right? And it's a silly thing, but it's really important because that kind of marks a shift in kind of how value is perceived, right? We saw this with GME, and we saw it some with Tesla, where the PE ratio of that company is completely disconnected from kind of traditional metrics. And I think the world is starting to kind of wake up to this fact that it's really the meme or belief, how many people believe in something, particularly in the context of kind of the financialization of the world, right? We're no longer blue collar jobs, barely exist today, right? In many ways. And, particularly with the context of COVID, a lot of people did a lot more on the internet, and a lot of that has to do with financialization, with gambling, with stocks, with crypto, with every kind of one of these internet native things. And these memes and these beliefs can really drive and actually become a true thing, even if it wasn't before, interestingly enough.
Yeah, and it's tremendous that the first non-nation state currency, major currency, is out there, and the people who have made, have lived and died by the nation state currency, fiat currency, are now saying, "Yeah, I'm buying this stuff. I'm into it." And I think that is just such a that's the nuclear bomb of how this changes things, right? Is just you can go outside of government, even looking at NFTs. The simple something, just especially people more my age or whatever, who say it's a file. How can it be rare? And you say, well, what's the Declaration of Independence, right? It's a piece of paper with some ink on it, but it's tied to something that gives it value. It's rare. It's perceived rarity gives it value. So an NFT is tied to something with a perceived rarity, but just that simple mind shift of understanding where the real value comes from. And of course, the classic example is a piece of paper that says 20 on it, but we'll get $20, worth of nachos with it or whatever. Right? So, so it's I think it's such a profound wake up call for so many people to understand, value.
Yeah, it's hard to, I'm a millennial. I was 18 during the financial crisis, and there wasn't that much opportunity for myself and many of my people in my cohort, if you will. So I grew up playing video games my whole life, and saw how valuable a sword in World of Warcraft could be, for example, in this purely digital world. And now it's bleeding into the real world because we're finding it difficult to when I say we, as in millennials, kind of capture some value in the old world. Yeah. So we went and created our own digital world with value, and now it's starting to really have some friction with the real world. And part of that disconnect that you just described is starting for people to really realize that it's really how many people believe something has value is what gives it value, to succinctly put it. So.
Yeah, and even one of the guys that I listen to whenever I can is Balaji, Srinivasan,
Yeah, brilliant person.
and he says, look, you go home at night and your best friends maybe 3,000 miles away, and the two people that live, the person lives on the house or apartment on your right and the apartment on your left, you may not even know them if you pass on the street. Pass them on the street. So the whole idea of a community is changing, and you look at the elements of a community. It's common XYZ. It's shared XYZ. It's transacting together, and all of those things now are starting to become more and more commonplace. Meeting people, meeting your spouse, right? It's happening in a distributed way around the country, and yeah, it seems to be a pretty inevitable march.
Yeah, really exciting next 10 years that we're gonna have.
Cool. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your knowledge. I love that Pocket is based here in Tampa Bay, so we'll give a shout out to our hometown. We'll be heading up the Florida Blockchain Summit next week. You'll be speaking there, and I will be listening there. and thanks. Well, thanks for coming in. We'll keep on keeping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.